Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Tonight we've got a collection of werewolf and dogman stories that all are related either to Thanksgiving or else Black Friday. Let's kick it off with Black Friday Sale Werewolf Freakout. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Back in 2021, there were a bunch of riots on Black Friday in various places all across the country. A lot of it got reported, but so much insanity went on that year that a lot of it slipped under the radar. I know this for a fact because that was the year that I saw a guy freak out and turn into a werewolf in the middle of a crowd of shoppers trying to rush into his store. You can be certain that story never made it to any newspaper or news show. This was in Wisconsin, so maybe that's why it didn't make the news. Although we've had other riots get reported on, so I don't know. Maybe it was just that nobody shot video and put it on Twitter or Facebook when it happened. It was all so sudden that I don't think anyone was able to get their camera apps turned on in time. I know in my particular case, I needed to get the heck out of the way of the creature. I was entirely focused on just surviving the incident. I couldn't think about luxuries like taking photographs to commemorate my being trampled underfoot, or under claw in this case, right? So I was with some of my friends, and we were in a growing crowd waiting to get into a Best Buy or something like that, which was having a Black Friday sale. I just wanted to save some money on a backup hard drive. That's all I wanted to do that day. Instead, I never got to buy anything because of that insane creature that invaded the crowd and nearly got us all killed dead. My two friends each have different opinions about whether it was a dogman or werewolf or what. Blevins says it was a werewolf because a dogman couldn't have snuck into that crowd of humans. My other friend Hartley, though, he says it was a dogman because no werewolf could be so big as this creature was that we all had to deal with. It was big. As big as a bear, I'd say. I've never had a bear pressing up into my back before, though, so maybe I could be wrong. I just know that I felt something warm and furry pressing into me, right? And I tilted my head back and I looked up, and I saw an animal head directly over me. Above me, you know? I'm just under 6 feet tall, so if I could see his head above me, then he had to be, I don't know, 8 feet? I'm just guessing here. He was probably even taller than that. I never saw anyone transform from human to wolfman on the one hand. And I never saw a 9-foot-tall beast man walk into the area in front of that store either. So I don't really know how the creature got in there with us. And I can't say that I know what the thing even was. All I know for sure is that it was there, right behind me. And that when it started pressing us all forward, all hell broke loose. My first instinct was to drop down and try to get away through the crowd. But I was too afraid that the creature would bowl over me from behind and trample the life out of me. So instead of dropping down, I took efforts to stand up as tall as I could. I sort of felt like a drowning person trying to keep my head above the water level. The top of my head never got so far up as the bottom of this creature's neck. It was more than a full head taller than I was. But it didn't really smell as strongly as you might expect an animal that large to smell. In fact, it didn't really have much of an odor at all, which seems strange in retrospect. Maybe that goes to support my friend Blevins' theory that it was a werewolf. After all, if a human takes a shower and then turns into a werewolf, he's not likely to smell like an animal, is he? But if that creature were a dogman, spending his life out in the woods, then he'd likely smell pretty strongly from living that kind of a lifestyle. Either way, what happened was that the creature pushed me forward into other people, and I cried out to them that I couldn't stop. People started screaming and panicking, and I felt like I might be about to be crushed. Some other guys, though, they joined with me, locking our arms together, and the bunch of us formed a human wall, where we pushed back against the big monster behind us that was pushing us forward. It took all the combined strength of the 4 or 5 or 6 of us just to slow that creature down. We were still being pressed forward, so how strong was that animal? It was the strongest thing I could imagine. Strong as an elephant, really. And then suddenly, something caught the creature's attention, and all of the pressure against us ceased. All at once, we went flying backward, each of us injuring something different from the others. I injured some muscles in my neck and shoulders when I landed, and I still feel it sometimes when I wake up after sleeping funny. I was too busy recovering from my injuries to see where the monster thing ran off to, and I never got the backup drive I was there to buy. I think the only thing I bought that day was some aspirin or acetaminophen or something of that nature for my muscle pains. I suppose we all got off lucky though. It could have ended up being much worse for the entire bunch of us. My buddy turned into a werewolf on Black Friday. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got the craziest of all Dogman stories for you. My own friend turned into a dogman in public, right in front of my eyes, and an entire crowd of Black Friday shoppers. This would have been back in the earlier 2000s. I'm going to say maybe 2002 or 2003. I don't even know if they called them Black Friday sales yet, but we had a mall where we would drive to that was having sales on the day after Thanksgiving that year. I went to buy records. I think they had music on sale. This was back when you still went to the store to buy music. Probably CDs, but I don't even really remember. We never got into that store anyway. So that part ended up not mattering. My friend we will call Joseph had told us that he was a werewolf ever since we were in 8th grade together, but we just humored him about it. He was the richest of us and he had the biggest allowance, so when he'd start to tell us that he had to go away to be locked up because the full moon was coming, we all acted like we believed him. None of us did though. I figured he did in fact have some kind of an embarrassing illness, but not actually werewolfism. I was guessing maybe VD or something like that. I don't know why VD would be tied to the full moon, but there you go, that was my guess. So this one time, when he came with us to that Black Friday sale at the electronics or music store, we didn't know how much it would stress him out being in that crowd. And in turn, he didn't know that stress could trigger his transformation. So when push came to shove, and shove came to pushing even harder, my buddy Joe started to gyrate and palpitate all over the place. Joe got bigger. He got darker, which at first I thought was his skin turning black as night. It was actually black fur growing out of his skin. He was getting bigger, furrier, more muscular. His face was extending out into something more like a dog muzzle. And when people started to notice this, they screamed, and they ran away in all directions. Not me, though. I looked up at Joe in wonder. He really was a werewolf. This was the coolest thing that had ever happened. I started laughing and cheering as the chaos grew all around me. I looked up at Joe, and I could see in his eyes that he was not enjoying any of this. In fact, he was panicking, and he began making pathetic dog whining sounds. He looked just as scared as all the people around him. I grabbed Joe by the paw, and I led him back out of the crowd. Seas parted at our approach, and my main problem was keeping my excitable friend calm, as we walked through rivers of people all running into each other, while trying to get away from us. By the time we reached the car, Joe was nearly human again, and we stopped holding hands. Me and my other friends were jumping up and down and demanding that Joe transform back again into the werewolf while we could watch him. It took us some time to realize that he wasn't celebrating along with us. Joe was overcome emotionally. He was nearly crying as we ushered him back into the car and drove on out of that parking lot. It seems he had never transformed before except under the full moon. All of his ability to control the werewolf was based on knowing exactly when the attacks would come and how long they would last. Learning that stress could randomly set off transformations was a crushing thing for Joe to learn. It took away his ability to predict when it would happen, and it eliminated his ability to plan ahead. It also meant that he had to avoid high-stress situations from then on, which led to him becoming a far more withdrawn type of guy than he had been earlier. Joe's gotten into meditation, which seems to be helping him. I've noticed he seems more accepting of his situation and the random nature of the universe. He tells me that we each have challenges which erupt in our lives, and that although the situation is different for each of us, we can turn these hardships into the very same lessons and learn the same things that others learn around us. It's our choice whether to choose to be afraid of all these hardships, or if we use it to learn to become more mature because of them. So to him, Joe says, being a werewolf has been his greatest teacher of them all. Thanksgiving weekend bus ride werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I had a weird Dogman experience last Thanksgiving, or I guess it was the Friday or Saturday after Thanksgiving, really. I was riding the bus home from where my parents live these days in Vermont, back to Michigan where we were all originally from and where I still live. To be honest, I guess I should call this a werewolf story because I saw this guy before he became a dogman, and he looked completely human to me. He wasn't a hairy unibrow guy or anything. He looked incredibly ordinary, and he came on the bus with his backpack. The only reason I noticed him was all the difficulty he had maneuvering himself and his backpack into a seat next to someone else. So it was hours later into the drive, in the middle of the night, when all of a sudden, the guy starts making these weird whimpering noises and saying things like, "Oh no," and "not now." And then, all of a sudden, he climbs over the person next to him, leaving his backpack in his seat, and starts running up to the front of the bus. As he ran past me, I saw that he had what looked like a werewolf costume on, and a crazy over-the-top scared expression on his face. I won't lie, I burst out laughing when I saw him. I wondered how he had slipped into that mask back there in his seat. I thought it was some kind of a performance art moment or something. No one else besides me was laughing, however. That monster man ran to the driver and started shouting at him to stop the bus. The driver started reciting his prepared speech about how he was not legally allowed to stop except in designated places or whatever. And then that guy started screaming at him to stop. And he started slamming his fist into things, and women started screaming too. I couldn't see exactly what was happening, but the bus slowed down, and that front door came open. We never came to a full stop, but the guy in the werewolf costume jumped off the bus, and then the driver started pulling away. He just drove away and closed the bus doors as he did so. A lot of the passengers were screaming, and people were freaking out all over the place. Some were just waking up and asking what happened, while others were shouting about Satan and Jesus. It was not a very comfortable scene. The driver made an announcement that didn't really make any sense, but people calmed down a little afterward. I guess just because he had suggested that we calm down a little afterward. People started going through the werewolf's backpack, passing around his personal items. There was nothing in there about werewolfism, though, as far as anyone could see. There was no Halloween makeup kit in the bag either. The person sitting next to him said they were sleeping, and then suddenly a werewolf was climbing over them. So nobody really saw the beginning of the transformation. We argued about whether it was a trick or if it had really happened when the bus driver called out to us and asked for the backpack to be left up front with him. People groaned in disappointment, but we were not thieves, so we gave it all to the driver. There was ID inside, so it would have had a better chance of getting back to the Wolfman through that driver than through any of us. Last year I rented a car and drove to Vermont with my sister. She was saying we'd probably run into the Dogman the whole way there and the whole way back, but such was not the case. Personally, I've had enough of that kind of business to last me a lifetime.
The Big Box Outlet, Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I've got a short but sweet Dogman story for you that goes back a very long way. This happened near Chippewa Falls in I guess 1989 or 1990. During the period in my late teens and early 20s when I worked in retail stores in various capacities. I was a big guy even when I was young, so I could easily get hired for jobs involving moving big boxes around and so forth. I did do some on-the-floor sales work as well, but I actually preferred to be in the back and away from the public for the most part. So I guess that the time I worked in stores kind of marked the end of the way things had been done, and the beginning of the way it would start to become nowadays with the giant discount retail outlets. One of those years I got hired to work November through 2 days after Christmas in a sort of experimental concept store. I kinda got to see the birth of Black Friday in a sense. I mean, I found out later that the term had already been being used for some time, not necessarily in our area, but still it felt like I was there at the beginning. It wasn't like what we did invented the Christmas sale, but what we were doing was paving the way for what was to come in the 2000s. When I was a kid, people complained that Christmas was becoming too commercialized. By 2006 or 2007, there were people literally getting killed in Black Friday sale stampedes. People almost died the morning of our sale too, but it wasn't because of crowds of mad shoppers. It was because of the Dogman. So Tuesday and Wednesday of that week had been our main setup days. 2 days to get the entire place prepared for the public. Then on Thursday, I volunteered for the skeleton crew that was going to watch the place on Thanksgiving. We all goofed off, as you would expect. We hung a banner on the front of the old closed-down department store building that we were staging our temporary store inside of. We were in the largest central building of an outside mall, built next to a big empty parking lot. There were some stores still in business in the outdoor mall, but none of them were open on Thanksgiving, and so the place was really desolate. In fact, it was completely empty, other than our small crew, and nobody was even driving around through the area. It smelled pretty musty inside, and the weather was fairly warm, so we had the doors open a lot to air the place out. It was a large interior space with high ceilings, but the entrances and exits seemed relatively small to me. It was hard for us to get enough of a breeze going through there to get that smell out. So toward the end of my shift, one of my coworkers and I went out back for a break, and we both immediately saw the same thing, which was a big, black, shiny, hairy animal moving quickly between two trees. Its fur reminded me of a black cat, but its size and shape were more similar to that of a very tall man. It did have a tail as well. These were the things that we both agreed on. My coworker also said the man had ears like Batman up on top of his head. I didn't notice the head of the creature at all. I just saw the bent over bipedal running body disappear behind trees and bushes, and I saw its tail dragging behind it in the air as it dashed along. Honestly, it looked more to me like a cat's tail than a dog one, but it didn't really resemble either that closely. The other guy was also saying maybe it was a man dressed as a black cat or something. We both were thinking feline more than canine, but I don't know why. I do know we wandered away from the back of the outlet store, leaving the door wide open, and we wandered into the woods for a ways, looking to see if we could get a better glimpse of whatever that was, which we had seen dart into there. We probably walked around for a minute or two at least, because I remember we heard someone calling for us before we headed back. We both wondered out loud what that was which stood like a man, but was covered in fur with a long tail. Soon it was quitting time though, and we stopped caring about what kind of animal that was which we thought we had seen. It was time for us to go eat turkey, and for the next shift to come on. So I was part of the early crew on Friday morning. We opened the place up and found it somehow smelled worse than it had the night before. It was a different kind of smell this time, and I wondered if some animal had died in there or something. If only the answer had been that benign. Searching through the aisles, we found a lot of stuff thrown around on the floor and torn open with what looked like big bear claws. We all went on alert that a bear might be in the store. Now logically, you get out of there and you call animal control to come take care of the problem. Unless it's 1989 or 1990, and you have a psychotic boss whose entire life savings is tied up in this store that you accidentally let a large predatory animal into. In that case, you stick around and you look for the beast yourself. I came across the largest pile of dog doo I'd ever seen, and as a result, I got the privilege of shoveling it into 2 buckets and carrying them both outside into the back. It made me think, what if when my coworker and I had wandered into the woods in the back to get a better look at that big animal, well, what if it ran inside while we weren't standing by the open door? Or what if something else just as nasty ran in at that moment? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we had probably left a number of doors open for a really long time the day before, and on into the evening. We hadn't really expected animals to come inside, especially not large meat-eating ones, but it seemed that this must have been what occurred. I figured I'd better keep my mouth shut about what I'd seen, since I could get fired for leaving the back door unattended. And if it turned out to be my fault that an animal snuck inside and destroyed valuable merchandise, our nutjob boss might demand I reimburse him for his losses. So, I decided to forget what I remembered about that long-tailed man-like thing that I'd seen the day before with that other guy. And then I walked back inside and headed down one of the long aisles back toward the areas we'd seen torn up and destroyed. As I walked, though, I heard something behind me. It sort of sounded like the sound of a dog's nails on hard linoleum, but it also sort of didn't. I listened to it as I walked along. I didn't hear the sound of dog tags. There was no metal jangling around. It sure did sound like dog nails on linoleum, but something was missing. Turning around and looking down, I saw 2 dog feet walking on the hard floor behind me. Oh, that's what sounded different. There were only 2 dog feet, not 4. Wait. Turning around again, I found myself more interested in what those 2 dog feet led up into above them. Well, it wasn't a cat, I'll tell you that much. It was black-furred. It did have a long tail, but it was not feline. It was some form of a canine, like a wolf, and like a dog, but upright, and standing bipedally, the way human beings do. Its paws were bigger than my hands, and looked like catcher's mitts with claws. Its eyes were like little white-hot suns, tinged in yellow and orange. They made him look insane, and I ran away, screaming. We had been waxing those floors for 2 days, and not too many people had been walking on them yet, so I found myself slipping and sliding as I tried to run. Behind me, that dogman, trying to run on his long dog nails, discovered that he was finding even less traction as he crashed from side to side, jettisoning things from shelves and slamming large holes in boxes. When we reached an intersection between aisles, I ran headlong into one of the other employees by accident. The 2 of us tumbled and rolled all the way over to the frozen food aisle. The dogman, however, continued to barrel forward, slamming into merchandise and human beings with equal abandon. I'm not trying to make light of things as a number of people sustained injuries, and I know that none of this was funny to them. I remember the owner standing in the front of the store, ordering everyone to stop running. I think some of them tried to, but a number slid into and fell over the boss man anyway. They couldn't help it. He was standing in their way. The dogman ran over our boss on his way out to the parking lot, which was the last I saw of him. Maybe the dogman mobile was parked out there, I don't know. In either case, once he left, he stayed gone and didn't return the entire time we were there, till after Christmas. I actually had a guy ask me once if I saved any of the dogman poo, and I told him sure. Come around to my place sometime and I'll sell you a handful of it. He thought I was serious and asked for my address. No, of course I didn't save any of the poo left behind by the big box outlet Dogman. My turkey scared off a dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Way back in the 1970s, my family and I saw a dogman. We called it a werewolf, and we kept it secret to ourselves so that the entire neighborhood didn't think we were crazy. Nobody knew that there were real-life wolf-headed men back in those days, but we knew that there were because one showed up in our backyard trying to figure out how to abduct our Thanksgiving Day meal. There was a year when I was a kid that my father won a turkey in a Halloween raffle. We all thought it was going to be a frozen one, but when the guy came by to deliver the prize, it was an actual living turkey in a cage far too small for it. My father went to the pet store and got something to clamp onto its leg, then tied the thing up so that it had the run of the yard. A friend of his told him what to feed it and how to fatten it up, and the plan was to butcher the poor guy for our Thanksgiving dinner that year. My mom had grown up on a farm and she knew how to do that kind of stuff. Dad was a city boy. He ran and hid when Mom did the slicing and the dicing. He would go fishing, but then she would have to gut the fish for him so that he didn't faint. Anyway, this was back in the 1970s, but even that long ago, it was a weird thing to have a turkey tied up in your yard in the suburbs in Pennsylvania. Granted, we were on the very edge of the suburbs, bordering up on a large natural area in back of us, but our house was technically at the end of a street in suburbia. We were over south of Pittsburgh in a town that I still have family in, so I'd rather not mention it by name. We lived in an area where sightings of thunderbirds and Bigfoot are still to this very day fairly common, but we never saw those things. I did have a friend at school whose whole family had watched a flashing UFO over their backyard for over an hour. I talked to his sister about it. She told the same story he did, so I know it was a real event. But the paranormal event that happened to my family was our sighting of the Dogman, and it was all centered around that turkey. Of course, being a kid, I had named the turkey, and of course, not being very original, I named him Tom. I had developed a liking for Tom, even though I doubt he could differentiate me from the other humans. I projected all sorts of wonderful Disney-like qualities on that ugly scavenger, and I grew increasingly sad about the idea of him giving up his entire life just to feed me and my family one single time. It seemed so unfair, even if we used him for sandwiches and leftovers too. I didn't want him to give up his one and only life just because he would be so delicious with a little salt and pepper. I began to try to broach the subject with my parents, asking them if we could maybe keep Tom as a pet and get some other turkey to have for dinner. I was laughed at. Eyes rolled in heads when I approached. I was informed of what it cost to keep Tom fed, and it was more than my allowance was, so I was unable to create a strategy I could afford, which would keep the bird alive. It became increasingly clear to me that my friendship with Tom would soon be leaving my heart and entering my belly. And then, a Thanksgiving miracle happened. I awoke on Thanksgiving morning to a horrible racket. It sounded like it was coming from out back where Tom was tied up. Frightened that he might be under attack from a dog or a cat, I raced out back. My father and mother were already there, staring in stunned surprise at the scene playing out in front of them. Old Tom Turkey was making this sound something like a growling. It was in the middle of a standoff with a creature that had to be 6 or 7 times its size. a creature that was probably 3 times my size. There was a dog-headed bear kind of thing standing there on its 2 back legs. Those legs looked more like dog than bear legs, as they stood up way taller in the air, and I could see daylight through them. The skin hung tight to its muscular frame, not loose the way a bear's skin hangs. It was leaning over, reaching out a giant hand that ended in these long, sharp-looking fingernails or claws. It looked like it wanted to grab that old turkey by its throat and run off with him, but each time he was about to grab, Tom would either move out of the way or snap at the dogman with his beak. It was clear that the little bird was scared, but it had the giant dogman just as freaked out, like those cartoons about elephants being scared of mice. Finally, Tom burst out with an absolute freakout of squawking and honking type scary sounds, charging at the huge dogman and flapping his wings insanely. The dogman leaped up like he'd never seen such a thing in his life, and, wide-eyed, he ran off into the forest. I'm betting that was the first turkey that dogman had ever seen in real life. It looked like he thought that bird was going to eat him, instead of the other way around. I ran down to see if Tom was all right, but he tried to snap at me too. He was still too upset to get anywhere near. That was one serious ninja turkey that we had living with us that year. Well, of course, I argued that we had to keep that bird as a pet now. I mean, it had scared a werewolf off. I was told, first of all, that was a bear, and second of all, that my father had scared it off, not the turkey. I was completely overruled, and we ate Old Tom for dinner that Thanksgiving. I thought about abstaining from the meal out of respect to my late avian friend, but he was cooked so well, it smelled too good to resist. I said a prayer for the brave old turkey, and then dug in. But I might not have survived to tell this tale if it hadn't happened that my turkey scared off a dogman. Timothy Walker, a real punk rocker, number 1 from here to Davy Jones' locker. Please join us in thanking tonight's executive producer, Timothy Walker. Timothy gets to watch our secret uncensored stories that we do each Sunday night. You can too. Just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or do what Timothy Walker, the real punk rocker, did and click the join link under this or any of our videos. Become a channel member and help keep us on the air. But are you ready for a Christmas story? It's sent to us by a cranky, unhappy husband, and we call it The Christmas Shopping Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I love Christmas. I hate everything leading up to it, but I love Christmas. As hard as the shopping and spending and preparations can be, it all gets a whole lot worse if you run into a dogman at any point during the process. This year my wife is at her mother's with the kids while I'm staying here watching our house and the neighbors' pets. I haven't looked forward to Christmas this much since I was a kid. I will get to sleep to whatever time I feel like waking up, and I will get to be gloriously alone all the time, every single day. Now, if that doesn't describe the happiest time of the year, I don't know what does. Maybe I'll stop disliking the season so intensely by next year, or the year after. But it was the time leading up to Christmas 2019 that really pushed me over the edge. I'll call it the Christmas of Dogman, and I'm about to tell you why. My wife, we can call her Stella, and I were on our way home from arguing about shopping in front of other people in various stores. Stella becomes incredibly defensive when we go shopping. It doesn't matter what I say, she gets that alarmed sound in her voice, as though we were caught in a stairwell that was on fire, and she begins hurling accusations at me of wanting to ruin her life, or kill her, or poison her, or she announces that I accused her of doing the same to me. Loudly. Always loudly. She craves any kind of attention. She can never get enough attention. She wants everyone in the room looking her way, even if she has to drop her pants and fart to achieve it. But why humiliate yourself for attention when you have a husband? It's hell being with her in the stores. She constantly asks me questions I have no answer to. I don't know if it makes her look fat. I don't know which color would go better with her glasses. I don't know, and I don't care. But if I say that, then I'm told that I just told her I don't care about her, which of course I never said. I get told 7 or 8 times a year that I tell her I don't care about her. She told her shrink that I often tell her I don't care about her because of that one time I told her I didn't care about which outfit she bought. And she told me that her shrink thinks I'm abusive and that she should leave me. I told her that her shrink is a charlatan who charges crazy people money to assure them that they're sane. She told her shrink that I'm gaslighting her by telling her that she's crazy. So I was trapped in this version of reality. And then the station wagon actually died. The vintage thing was going to have to go sooner or later, but it went there, on the highway, with Stella in mid-rant. She told me to get out and check the engine, and I called my car service instead. This infuriated her, and she flew into a rage. By the time I actually did go out and open the flaming hot hood to look at the steaming and destroyed old engine, Stella was in full temper tantrum mode. I noticed that she and all her friends had become like childish brats over the past few years. They need their way all the time, or they become a danger to themselves and others. In this case, Stella began taking Christmas presents out of the back of the station wagon, wrapped in holiday paper by the store clerks for us at extra expense, and Stella threw them at me. They bounced off me and landed in the snow, ruining the paper and sometimes the gift itself. She had put both of us through hell to obtain those items, and now she was ruining them because somehow it was my fault that the ancient car had finally died. That thing outlived its normal usage by 5 or 6 years at least. I kept telling her we needed a new one, but she insisted that it was my fault that the car was aging. So now she had to destroy Christmas presents because I had broken her car on purpose. Honestly, it's like living in Romper Room, and she's 5 years older than I am. I have to remember what that nice police officer told me that time when she was flipping out on the street corner that day. He said she wants me to hit her. He says he knows her type, and she has the cops on speed dial because she's constantly trying to get someone to abuse her. And that way, she can get away with being abusive 24/7 until that happens, since everyone is afraid to say or do anything back to her. That cop told me, just never give her what she wants. Never lose your temper. If you do lose your temper, then she wins. He was right. I didn't say anything to her as she threw the cashmere sweater she had bought her mother into the snow to punish me for breaking her car. I just picked up whichever presents seemed salvageable, and I put them back in the station wagon. I knew we were going to be there for a while waiting for my car repair people, and I reminded myself I'd better get into a patient mood. I also reminded myself that as bad as Stella gets when we're alone, she's always far more abusive when she has a larger audience. So, no matter how nasty she was being, I knew it was a vacation compared to what was about to come. And then, out of the blue, I saw a dog-headed man, or maybe a large dog that was standing on its hind legs. It was about 150 or so feet down the highway. Like if I were at home plate, he was standing in shallow right field. He saw me right as I saw him, and he turned in our direction and began running toward us on his hind legs, the way a man would. He had a horrible expression on his face, just a terrifying look, and I shouted at Stella to get in the car. I jumped into the driver's seat and tossed the presents I'd been carrying in the back. I locked all the doors, then realized Stella was still outside. I looked at her like she was insane. What was she screaming? She was shouting at me that I had no right to order her to get in the car. I was not her master and she was nobody's slave. Then she got extra abusive. She started to mix stuff about the patriarchy in with deeply personal information about our sex life. I rolled down my window, leaned my body out, and shouted at her that there was a dog man running toward us. I don't know what she started to say, because the dog man began barking at her loudly, and she ran away toward the back of the station wagon and down the road, screaming. The dog man was barking at her in this strange way, where it almost sounded as though he were speaking a Germanic language. She kept hopping up and down in a clumsy and uncoordinated way, and I remembered how graceless her movements had always been. Why had I married her in the first place? I think my parents were even more abusive than she was. She saw me coming a mile off, and she married me before I grew up enough to understand that I don't like the way she and my parents treat me. And now, our kids are teenagers, so I feel like I only need to put in another 4 or 5 years and they'll be adults. Then I won't feel guilty about divorcing her. Isn't that funny? I was watching this apex predator chasing my wife, and those were the thoughts going through my head. I never wondered if the dog man would kill her and eat her. I never feared for her safety. I just reminded myself that I only need to do this for another 4 or 5 years, and I wondered how she would end up blaming the dog man on me. I watched the animal chase my ridiculous screaming wife into the woods, and I actually breathed a sigh of relief. At least I wouldn't have to listen to her screeching for a while. I nearly entertained the thought that she might never come out, but let's face it, that would be way too good to be true. If the dogman did her in, it would be an animal attack. I'd get a lot of sympathy. I'd be free. So of course I knew that was just not going to happen. Stella burst out of the woods, her eyes bigger than her head. I unlocked the passenger door and opened it for her. She got in and started shrieking at me. I told her to lock the door, and instead she just kept shrieking. I looked past her at the magnificent and monstrous creature racing like an Olympic sprinter from the cover of the wood toward her car door. He was coming so fast that I was not sure I could reach her door to lock it in time. I dove across my wife's half of the car, trying my best not to touch her big, gelatinous midsection, or any part of her at all, since I knew later she would tell people I punched her belly or something if I even touched her. I was exerting maximum effort to lock that door in order to save both of our lives, to prevent us from being ripped to shreds by the advancing predatorial carnivore, but I was still concerned about what Stella was going to tell other people that I had done. She had me more afraid of her abuse than of being torn apart by a monster. Even as I locked the door, she screamed in my ear that I was bothering her. Even as the dogman slammed into her car window, she still hurled insults at me. It was my fault that all this was happening, she asserted, and then she began listing all the things wrong with me that had led up to this moment. She talks so much that sometimes you can just blank her out. You just focus on real life and her ill fantasies merge with the background music. As she ranted incoherently and condescendingly, mockingly, I watched the other monster in this story circling the car outside. I saw the yellow eye glow that the creature is so famous for, and I felt, for the first time in my life, true terror. The way that thing moved, I didn't see how we were going to survive. It looked like it could tear the car apart by itself. Stella wouldn't shut up. And for a second, I thought about unlocking her door and throwing her out there as a sacrifice. The only problem was, if she survived, then she would tell everyone that I had done it. But fortunately, my car repair people showed up, and the dogman ran off at their approaching headlights. So people asked me about the appearance of the creature. It had long hair like an orangutan, but dark colors. It hung long from his limbs and was a little curly, so it reminded me of Spanish moss. If Spanish moss was black hair, it would be this dogman's coat. It had tall, pointy, wolf-like ears and very big teeth. The mouth was like a dog's mouth, hanging open and panting. The front paws were huge and almost resembled hands in a way. I never saw it drop to all fours. I only saw it standing upright. It did have the glowing yellowish eye shine, and it stood taller than any man, taller than an NFL All-Star. It did not have a tail. Fast forward to this year. Thankfully, Stella agreed to go stay a couple of towns over with her mother and the kids for Christmas. My son told me that she's telling her mother's neighbors that I wasn't invited this year because I threw her mother's cashmere sweater into the snow back in Christmas 2019. I knew she'd end up blaming me for that, as well as for the Christmas shopping Dogman.
Dogman on Fish Lake Road in Holly, Michigan. On June 1st, 2005, a repo man named Jeff Cornelius claims he came face to face with an angry dogman or werewolf on Fish Lake Road in Holly, Michigan. I grew up on a little gravel road called Fish Avenue in the Bronx, so I was curious and started looking into this case a little. Okay, here's Fish Lake Road to the north and west of Detroit. I don't actually know the address of the incident, but when I punched in Fish Road, Holly, Michigan, Google Maps brought me here. It's a very countrified neighborhood, but there are retreats here and the Oakley, which is apparently a place you go to have a fancy wedding. So it's not like Deliverance. It is the country, but with some money, I guess. Let's go down to where Google Maps tells us to look, and wow, that's kind of a country road, isn't it? Not very wide. Is it paved? I think it's paved but covered in dirt anyhow, somehow. Well, this looks like a place where you would run into the Michigan Dogman, doesn't it? I'm getting chills just looking around at it. Yeah, this is a dirty road. Something is running out of that dirty forest onto this road all the time. That's what it looks like to me. So let's go back in time to 2005. The witness, Jeff Cornelius, was trying to repossess a vehicle that he knew was owned by a resident on that road. He was driving by late at night, looking for this car. There was a locked shed that he thought might be large enough to hide the car inside of. So Jeff hopped out of his vehicle and was peeking into the window of the shack looking for the other one. Suddenly he heard a growling which Cornelius compared to the sound of a cappuccino maker. I think this is the sound he was comparing it to. Turning his head, about 75 feet away, he saw a creature covered in thick, gray and black fur. It was standing on two legs and stood about 5.5 feet tall, but hunched over, so it would have been taller if standing more upright. It had dog paws, not hands, and they were held out in front of it in a threatening manner. The hind legs were not human legs. They were bent like canine legs are. It should be noted that this also means they did not resemble bear legs either. As soon as he caught sight of the upright monster dog, it tore ass directly at him. Cornelius ran to his truck and spun it around to shine the headlights at the creature, but it had run off into the night. Was this a dogman that Jeff Cornelius had seen? It was a full moon that night, so maybe it was a real-life werewolf. Maybe the owner of that vehicle he was looking to repossess was the one who chased him off. Jeff's co-workers laughed at him for even implying such a thing when he got back. But on the other hand, none of them was willing to take that job after he dropped it. Do you think that story really happened? Well, I think it actually did, and so did the late Linda Godfrey, who wrote it up in her book Real Wolfman, which we have a special link to in the description. She has a lot of other equally interesting cases in the book, and if you order from that link in the description, we do make a small commission back, so it helps the channel continue to stay online a little bit longer. And speaking of helping the channel stay online, here's Bigfoot to talk about today's executive producer. Biggie? I might sound like A Street Hawker, but I'm shouting all about Godzilla Tim Walker. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer Godzilla Tim Walker, who made this episode possible. Godzilla is one of the coolest people in all of Ireland, and we wish we could thank him a lot more than we do. In return for all his help, he gets to see our secret uncensored stories, and other perks too. Here to tell you about all of it is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.